For many people around the world, the traditions of Christmas celebrate struggle and hope. That certainly applies to Black Nativity, with scriptural narrative and gospel music transformed by the poet Langston Hughes. For almost half a century, the song play has been performed in Boston, currently produced by the National Center of Afro-American Artists. To tell us about this year's production is the center's executive director, Barry Gaither. Thank you very much for being with us, Barry.
Thank you very much. I'm always pleased to join you this time of year.
Barry, I want to see if you can take me back to the beginnings, because you were involved with this, I guess, even before the beginning. So what about the Boston connection to Hughes himself?
Well, the real link to Black Nativity for us was John Andrew Ross. John Ross's father had gone to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania with Langston, and they were great friends, and whenever Langston came to Boston, he stayed with John's father, so he was like an uncle to John. When the Black Nativity first toured nationally in the second half of the 60s, it did come to Boston, and all of this played out. So in the summer of 1970, John Ross, who had joined the staff of the National Center earlier in that year as the director of music, brought the proposal to the Wednesday cabinet meeting, which was where decisions got taken about what things the National Center would undertake. John came and he said he wanted to do Black Nativity. We had a national board that met 4 times a year, and each time it met, we did something special for them. So John's initial idea was that we would do this for their early winter meeting, and that's how the decision got taken. Now, when John came to make this proposal, we had a large staff and 2 choreographers. So one of the first things that concerned us was, who was John going to ask to do the choreography for this piece? The guy, George Howard, who did ethnic dance for us, was one of the choreographers. Billy Wilson, who did sort of jazz choreography, was the other person. And John sat and took a moment, and then he said, George, will you do the choreography? George took a long pause and said, yes, I'll do it, but if I do it, Mary is going to have that baby. And he said it with emphasis. And that's the birth of one of the most striking features in our production, which is the fully choreographed labor of Mary. That is the anchor for the pas de deux of Mary and Joseph. And I really must say I'd never heard of or seen a Christmas pageant or presentation in which the labor of Mary was so dramatically put forward.
Actually seismic, wouldn't that be a word?
Yes, and it was even stronger because at the time in our staff was Michael Babatunde Olatunji, who had really introduced African music into the American music scene in the 1950s. And he brought African drumming, and that base of drummers became the source of the music that brought to life the choreographed birth of the Christ child.
Talk about the importance of that, because you hear excerpts from Black Nativity and you say, oh, that's just gospel music from church, but when you combine that with the drumming, well, what's going on with people's cultural awareness when they're making that connection?
I think there are maybe 2 or 3 links here. One is the connection that George Howard and Olatunji brought was to anchor this story not just in Christianity, but in African rhythmic tradition. That's in both the dance, which is passionately performed, and in the music, which is dramatic and pulsing. There also is, flanking that, not just gospel tradition, but also a translation of the story of the birth of the Nativity from the New Testament into the vernacular. So the whole discussion that transpires around no room at the end becomes almost like a conversation, as you would imagine it, between some people who worked at, let's say, a Holiday Inn in the present. So there is this shift of the entire location of the story into a contemporary world that is urban and black, and which informs the quality that the show has. So when Black Nativity is finally selected as a title, the Nativity, of course, attaches to the long tradition, but the blacks suggest the cultural inflection with which the story is being told.
Of course, there was another goal from the outset here, and I guess this is also about, at least in thinking of Elmo Lewis, about community uplift. What about that?
Yes, Miss Lewis, who was director of the National Center and to whom the presentation was fundamentally put forward and for whom we all worked, had an extraordinary vision that the National Center's role in the world was to enunciate the contributions of black people to global civilization, to express how we participated in the big picture. And she always saw things with that largeness. So she saw this piece with that largeness. But part of her genius was, just as she saw at this grand level, she also saw teaching children in a very intimate, up close, and personal way, because she was fundamentally at heart a teacher. So from the beginning, our Black Nativity had a large participation of children. The original production had been all adult gospel singers, but John set music for the lightness of children's voices, for the special kind of glee that they could bring to that. And Miss Lewis came into it all to make sure that children learned some important lessons from their participation in Black Nativity. One of the important lessons was that they could do extraordinary things if they had confidence in themselves.
So you get this whole tradition of, this isn't a traveling production. These are people who live around Boston. They're doing this year after year. You have them starting out as children, maybe they grow into adults, and they're teaching.
Yes, this is a Boston-based production, and about a half to 2/3 of our cast are people who have been in previous shows, but every year we have at least a third that are new people, both among the children and among the adults. So the show is never exactly the same from year to year. The soloists change. Sometimes the exact pulsing varies a little, so there is room for improvisation within the matrix of the show, and that means it has a stability, a predictability, which allows it to be a tradition, but at the same time it has freshness, which allows it to be sparkling.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Barry Gaither from the National Center of Afro-American Artists. Barry, no sooner do you wrap up this year's productions, the 49th year, but you're going to get ready for the 50th year, and I guess starting in January?
Yes, we're looking forward to 2020, which will be our 50th year doing the show, and we've begun even now in preparing for that. For example, on the 13th of December, we have a story booth that will be at the theater. And if you're attending that night and you want to reflect on your history with Black Nativity or with Miss Lewis, you can step in and record it in the story booth, which is being run by Emerson College. And then we will weave all of that into the material for the 50th. So we're looking for alumni, for people who've previously been in the show and who may have been away or out of being regular, to come back and to participate in the great multitude that will be assembled for the 50th anniversary show. I'm looking forward to it.
Right.
Now, in this year, just as a matter of generations, we do have a Christ child who is the child of an older cast member who is now adult, but who was once a Christ child herself. So we do have this tradition of familial and communal participation over generations.
Right. Now, I know the performance is going to be at the Emerson Paramount Theater.
Yes, in the theater district.
And if people want tickets, what should they be looking for?
Well, you can go to blacknativity.org online and buy your ticket online, or you can call the office at Emerson's box office for the Paramount, and you can purchase the tickets that way.
Thank you very much for being with us. Barry Gaither from the National Center of Afro-American Artists. In a moment, we'll tell you about a stage production to raise awareness of a critical health problem. But first, this message.